Okay. Hello, everybody. This is me, Trinette from Testify. And this morning I am very excited to have Nanki with me here today. She is going to share a testimony regarding her one son, Uzziah, and the miracle that happened in his life. So before I continue, I just want to introduce and welcome you, Nanki. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Trinette.
It's a pleasure. So, you can start sharing your testimony. I'm so excited to hear it.
Now, the reason I wanted to share the testimony about Uzziah is I really and truly believe that God did actually two miracles in his life. I really believe the enemy wanted to steal his life. And I think it's important that other people realize, how powerful God is and how much he can do for his children. So the first thing that I want to share about Uzziah is as soon as I knew I was pregnant with Uzziah, I was a bit anxious, and I did a home pregnancy test, and I was about between 4 and 6 weeks pregnant with him. And then I coincidentally had an appointment with the gynecologist for my yearly checkup. And a few days later, I went to her and I said to her, I am pregnant, and she did a sonar. But at that point, the yolks or the sac was still empty. There was no embryo in. So she said it might be a bit early. She just wants to give me a week and then I must come back to her. Then she sees how everything went then. So immediately I was a little bit anxious again. And then I also started experiencing cramps. And I haven't experienced cramps before with my two other pregnancies. So that also was an alarm for me. And then I went to my GP and she suggested we tested the HCG hormone, which indicates how well your pregnancy is developing. So she did the test, and then later she phoned me and said she's sorry, but she first did a test and then we repeated the test about 2 days later. And then she said she's very sorry, but according to the blood results, the HCG value did drop, which is an indication that the pregnancy is not viable and that I will have a miscarriage in due time. I was very upset.
That's bad.
And
Bad news.
very bad news. And I had a friend that said we must pray because she prayed about her pregnancy that was also almost lost. But I was really struggling to pray with faith. So she said, well, she will pray, and she was very helpful and she had faith for me. Then I had the follow-up with a gynae, which I went through anyway, and I visited her again, and we did the sonar, and it was again an empty sac. And then I said to her, well, that makes sense because my hormone levels dropped. And then she said it is probably a blighted ovum, which means that the embryo stops developing, or it never did develop in the first place, and it's almost every time because due to genetically disorders. And then I discussed with her what is the best way to go forward from there, and she suggested I go for a DNC, which is a surgical procedure to really scrape out your uterus. So she suggested that is the best way, she thinks, for me. And we went into her office and we started, making arrangements for theatre next morning. Her personnel phoned my medical aid. I was completing the forms. And then she just said, no, wait, let's just wait a minute. And I believe up to this day that it was the Holy Spirit that made her stop. And she said, let's just check the blood results again. And she went onto the system and she checked the blood results. And she said, she doesn't understand, but my HCG levels didn't go down. It actually went up. And I couldn't understand, how was that possible? Who made the mistake? Or did God actually change the numbers? I don't know. But then she also looked at the sonar and she compared the first sonar to the second sonar. And then she said the sac actually did grow. And that is also an indication that there's something going on there. There's something growing. And she doesn't feel it's fair to do a DNC. She feels obliged to wait. And at that point, I was a bit upset because I didn't want that yo-yo experience. I didn't want to gain hope and then be disappointed again. So I actually said to her, can't we just get this over and done with? Because if we delay it with another week, I just prolong the agony. And she said, she just can't. We have to wait. And she said she will refer me to a colleague of hers who has a beta sonar, and this gynae actually didn't do pregnancies anymore. So she had to refer me. And it was a few days later, less than a week, I visited the next gynecologist. And when she did the sonar, there was a baby and a heartbeat.
Oh my word.
So I was so surprised. I couldn't believe it. I went back to that gynecologist and I told her that she actually saved my baby's life.
Sure.
And
that's amazing.
That was a miracle to me. And I also got a fright because I realized my baby was almost killed. It was so close and he was gone.
Yeah.
So that's how his life started. And I really believe the enemy wanted to take him out that early.
Sure.
My pregnancy otherwise actually went very well. There was no other complications. I was healthy. My baby was healthy. My gynecologist at that point wanted to do a cesarean section at 38 weeks. And I went for the C-section. It was the 24th of July. And when they took my baby out, Uzziah, he started crying, and we could immediately saw his mouth was asymmetrical. So it wasn't a normal cry face. It was almost skew. And we immediately asked the pediatrician who was there what was the reason for this. And he said, we don't have to worry. One of the nerves got probably pinched while he was laying in my womb, and it will resolve by itself. And otherwise, he was well, he was healthy. I did struggle to breastfeed. We really struggled. He couldn't latch properly, and he also didn't suck properly. So the only way I could feed him was when I was milking out. So that was a frustration. But I wasn't too alarmed about it because a lot of people struggle with breastfeeding. So that wasn't a warning sign for me. Although the first 6 weeks when I was home with him, I did notice in his posture and in his movements that there was something not right. I think it was my maternal instinct, but also, my background as an occupational therapist, I did notice some neurological signs that made me wonder whether there was a neurological dysfunction. And when he was 6 weeks old, I took him to the pediatrician and I asked him, please check him out for me. I'm a bit concerned. He checked him out and he said he did notice he had a torticollis neck. So that's just the one muscle in his neck that is tight, and that often happens when they lie in one position in the womb too long, but it can also be a neurological problem. So he sent me to an osteopath, and I went for an assessment there. And when she assessed Uzziah, she was very concerned. She tested his muscles, she tested his joints, his movements, and she was so sensitive that she could pick up that there was a difference in strength between his left and his right side. I couldn't pick that up because he's still a baby, so it's very hard to pick that up, but she did. And she asked me a lot of questions that made me worried, and I could immediately sense that she was wondering about a neurological condition. And at one point I asked her directly, are you concerned that my baby might have cerebral palsy? And she didn't want to answer me directly. She just said she's not sure, but there is some things that she's worried about. There's something in his neck that is not okay. There's something in his left shoulder and his left hip. And he definitely needs treatment and he's weaker on the left side. But she's going to start treatment and then we will see. So I took him every week for treatment. And she also showed me some things to do with him at home. And after 3 months, she was not happy with his progress. And I could even notice more things at home. Like, for example, when he was lying on his tummy, he wasn't weight bearing on both sides evenly. His left hand was definitely a little bit more inactive than his right hand. And then she said she needs to send me back to the pediatrician. We need to do more tests. I went to the pediatrician and he advised that he goes for a brain CT scan. And the CT scan only showed a cyst, which is like a small bubble with fluid in. And the pediatrician said it's actually very common. I don't have to be too worried. A lot of people have cysts in their brains. As long as it's not too big and it doesn't grow, it's not a problem. But he anyway sent me to a neurosurgeon. The neurosurgeon said it's too small to have any danger at this point. We must just repeat the CT scan in about a year to monitor and make sure it doesn't grow. So then I went back to the osteopath and we were unsure what was the reason for this neurological symptoms he had, but we continued treatment and he did make progress and I worked very hard with him at home. So he achieved actually all his milestones. The rolling did take a long time, but eventually he also accomplished the rolling. At 9 months though, I sort of noticed that he wasn't babbling like a baby. He was only making vowel sounds. He wasn't saying mama, da, 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 papa, da, da, like that. And that was another thing that I was concerned about. And I went to the pediatrician again and he sent me for a hearing test at an audiologist. And his hearing didn't test normal, but they found that there was fluid in his ears because of an upper respiratory allergy. So then after some treatments and fast forward a little bit, we went for grommets. And then I really thought that will be sorted because the fluid in the ear was the reason why he didn't hear properly and why his speaking didn't develop. And then I wasn't too concerned at that point because he was developing. I knew the grommets was in. And then when he was 12 months old, I took him back for an assessment at the pediatrician. And I was so relaxed at that point. I said to him, you don't really have to repeat the CT scan. I don't think it's that necessary. And he insisted and he said, no, we have to repeat it. We have to check that cyst. So I did take him for another CT scan. And then they discovered that some of the white matter in his brain died or degenerated. And it was the areas next to his ventricles. And it could be because of a condition called periventricular leukomalacia. So it's the dying of the white brain cells.
Oh.
So I went to the pediatrician, and luckily the cyst did shrink.
Okay.
So the cyst was no problem. But the pediatrician said, okay, he needs to explain to me that condition, that it can be one of two things. Either it was a once-off thing that happened probably in utero, where his brain had a shortage of oxygen, like a stroke or a bleeding, but that's a once-off incident. Or, on the other hand, it can be a degenerative condition where those white brain cells degenerate progressively. And then you will lose more and more function, you will lose more and more skill. And they often don't get older than 5 years old. They die actually because everything in their body, doesn't function anymore, and they stop breathing later. So he said, we don't know at this stage which one. So he has to refer me to a pediatric neurologist. And I wanted to go to a very good one. So I had to wait for 3 to 4 months to see her. And in that period, I was really struggling. I was struggling with fear. I was struggling to be positive. Even though my friends said I must speak life, I must speak life into his brain, I must pray for him, I struggled with that because there was evidence that he is having a neurological condition and that he even might not make it past 5 years. And just the thought of seeing my baby die before my eyes, I couldn't imagine myself coping with that. So that was a hard few months. But eventually I saw the neurologist, and she was concerned, but she wanted to do more tests. She was concerned about his brainstem functioning, specifically his auditory nerves. So she was concerned that he wasn't processing the auditory stimulation he was receiving. So his speech was still very limited at that point, but his hearing was fine. So she was concerned about after the auditory stimuli is taken in at the ear, it has to go with a nerve through the brainstem and then up to the upper centers of the brain. So she was concerned that that nerve and the pathway of that nerve was damaged. And she wanted to send me for a test that looks exactly at that auditory pathway. And then I was starting to read up about this auditory nerve and the neuropathy of this nerve. And I discovered an article which described neurological conditions in children that goes along with this neuropathy of the auditory nerve. And then almost things started to make sense for me. And even before I went to see her again, after doing all this research, I just thought, well, this is what he had, because he had auditory problems. So it must be the auditory nerve that's degenerating. And that is often the first sign of this degenerative disease.
Oof.
So everything was actually making sense to me, and I thought, okay, this is what he has. And I couldn't stop crying. I was crying day and night. And no one could really help me, because a lot of people told me, no, wait, maybe it's not so bad. You need to pray for him. You need to pray for his brain. You know, God can still do a miracle. But I was struggling. I was struggling to believe. I was struggling to believe that God can still change this. And I have to admit, I didn't have a lot of faith. I didn't. And I asked for other people in my life to pray because I couldn't. And I didn't want to be fake.
Yes.
So on the day before he went for this test, I went to take a whole box, and we'll talk about the whole boxes later. I took a whole box to someone, and this lady was seeing that I was in a bad state. And she asked me what's wrong. And I briefly told her the story. And she went to Uzziah, because Uzziah was with me in the car. And she laid her hands on him and she prayed for him. She prayed so beautifully, and she addressed his brain. She addressed all the pathways in his brain. And I could see in his face that his spirit reacted to her prayer. I could see that. And afterwards, I felt guilty, because I told myself, that is the prayer I should have prayed. Why couldn't I do that for him? Because I experience in my spirit the power of that prayer.
Sure.
But I was thankful for her.
Yes.
And we went for that test. And it was quite a lengthy procedure. He had to receive anesthesia. But everything went well. And afterwards, she gave us the feedback that the results were all positive. There was nothing that she saw of a neuropathy. The nerve was 100%. His auditory nerve, there was no problem there. And I was really surprised.
Yeah.
I couldn't actually believe it.
Yeah.
And then we went back to the neurologist, and she said it's such a good indication, because that partly rules out the diagnosis of the degenerative disease.
Amazing.
So it helped her a lot. And I was feeling much better.
Yes.
But it was almost still a bit unreal for me. So we went, for a few follow-ups to the neurologist, and she said we need to continue with all the therapy. So he continued with occupational therapy, he continued with speech therapy, and I worked hard like before, to do everything I can to stimulate his development. And we worked hard, especially with his auditory processing. And his speech. And during the second follow-up, I asked the doctor, please tell me, what is your diagnosis now? What is it? Is there a brain condition? Is there no brain condition? What do you think is the diagnosis? Because she didn't really tell me. And then she said, now, she looked at his brain scans very carefully, and she even went back to the original brain scan when he was a few months old. And she said he definitely does have that condition where the brain, the white brain cells degenerated. There's no question about it. It's very clear. But when she looks at him, with the function he has now, it can't be the same person. So if she looks at his brain scan, and if she looks at him in person, it can't be the same person. Because if she looks at his brain scan, she said he's supposed to be spastic in his lower limbs. Sure. He's walking, his legs are fine, he's moving like a normal 2-year-old. by that time. And I was quite, my faith was stirred when she
Sure.
said that, because I think by then I realized for the first time this was a miracle.
Yes.
Um, so
Amazing.
his speech was a bit behind, and we did work on that. And he was diagnosed with a speech dyspraxia, where the child struggles with planning of the movements in the mouth to
Okay.
make the correct sounds to speak. And then it made sense to me because he had struggling breastfeeding. So the muscles in the mouth,
Uh,
he also had a bit low muscle tone in his mouth. And up to this day, his mouth is still asymmetrical. So when he laughs, when he smiles, the one side is lower than the other side. But his speech did improve. And at the moment, it's really the only thing that is not 100%. Otherwise, his movements, his motor development is 100%.
sure. That's
He's
amazing.
on par with his development. When he turned 3 years old, I decided to take him back to his pediatrician because we haven't seen him in a while. And I looked at him and I asked him, "Do you remember us?" And he said, "How can I not remember you? Me and you both stressed a lot about this boy, but we never admitted it to each other, how stressed we were." And I
Sure.
said, "Yes." And I asked him, "If you look at him now, do you think he made such good progress because of the neuroplasticity in the brain? And because we stimulated him from an early age, the brain is amazing, and it can make new pathways. So the brain can actually overcome a problem, and he makes new pathways to overcome if it gets the right stimulation."
Mm.
I said to him, "Do you think it's that, or do you think it's a miracle?" And he looked at me, he said, he really believes it's a miracle because it's impossible for him to present like he's presenting now. And he said, God does miracles every day.
Sure.
It's actually not even rare. And
You.
we mustn't talk about it as it is a rare incident. He says he sees it every day, and he's a
Wow.
doctor.
That's amazing.
So today he's a 3-year-old, he's healthy, he's happy. Um, he's not speaking as well as his peers, but he's talking, he's interacting, he's playing. He's very close to a normal 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And
Amazing.
it's amazing how God restored everything that I was concerned about. That I have no fear at the moment that there's still something wrong. I
No.
know he's healed. I
Yeah.
know his brain is functioning normally.
Yeah. Wow.
Um, and I really want other people to know that, miracles is not rare.
Yes.
God can do miracles with anyone
Sure.
and anytime, even if you don't have enough faith.
Yeah. That's amazing. So one thing too, there's a few things that stands out for me. It's almost as if I see this a dip and then a up and a down and a up and it's almost as if the enemy always wants to come and steal, and it always starts with your mind. You don't really even know what's going on, but your mind expects the worst, and then you are so down on the ground. But then God
Yes.
comes and He lifts you up and He shows you again what He can do. But the other thing that stands out for me is the fact that you were surrounded by people that had faith for you. And
Yes.
it is so important and it is so special because you should not feel guilty that you couldn't pray. I mean, you went through a tough time before your son was born with your previous son, with your previous pregnancy. So the fear was there. But God sent people on your path because He knew. He knew what you went through and He knew that you were scared. That is such an amazing testimony. So I want to thank you for taking the time to share it with us. It is amazing. And I love the fact that the doctor said
Hmm.
miracles happen every day and he sees it. We shouldn't even worry or think or wonder if it is a miracle. It is a miracle and we have to take it as it is. It is a miracle and we have to glorify God. And that's why I'm so thankful that you shared it with us today. It's a beautiful thing.
It was an honor and such a privilege. And thank you for making the platform for me to do that. And
It's
may
only
you
Abba
also
Father,
be
it's
blessed.
not me. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
thank you, Trinette. It was lovely to share what the Father has done for us.
yeah,
We are very blessed.
yes,
And every day I look at him. It's I will never forget. And I hug him every day, as if he is a miracle,
yes, yes, because it is. And
makes me a better mother.
the fact that his mouth is still a little bit asymmetrical is such a beautiful reminder of the fact that he is a miracle and God saved him and he healed him for you and your family. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Okay,
Thank you so much.
thank you. Hopefully, we'll see another testimony from you soon.
Yes, there's lots of testimonies.
Amazing. Okay, we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you, Trinette. Bye.
Pleasure. Bye.